and then I'll go through the preliminaries for the meeting.
And we're live.
All right, welcome everybody to the meeting tonight. We have there's Alderman Barakis, and we're still waiting for Councillor Ewan. She's not here. So anyway, we'll get started. Can I have a motion, please, to co-opt Councillor Coates?
I'm happy to move that, Chair.
Thanks, Alderman Barakis. So any objections to Councillor Coates being on the committee?
Well, why wouldn't we co-opt the Lord Mayor, Chairman?
Lord
I'm
Mayor
already on
the committee.
Ah, you're already there. Sorry.
She can't do votes.
Coates.
Oh, no, okay. Look, you're unco-opted now, Councillor Coates, because Councillor Ewan has arrived. So we've got a full contingent. So moving on, item 2 is confirmation of minutes. Could somebody move those, please?
Moved.
Okay. Lord Mayor was the loudest, so I'll give it to you, Lord Mayor. All those in favour? Well, anyway, anyone object to the minutes? There being no objections, I'll declare that carried unanimously. Item 3, consideration of supplementaries. We don't have any. Item 4, indication of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. Nothing there for anyone. Item 5, transfer of agenda items. No need for that. Item 6 is reports. We have one report on the agenda, and that's item 6.1, Warona Avenue, West Hobart, response to petition stormwater concerns. Now, we have Mr. Pinkard with us at the moment to answer. Sorry, if we have any questions about this item, could we direct them towards Mr. Pinkard if you so desire or need to? And then Mr. Pinkard, so you're welcome to stay for the start of this, but then we'll ask you to move into the view, to go onto YouTube to watch the deliberations. Okay, so has everyone had a chance to read the report and also to look at the representation from Mr. Pinkard? Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Pinkard before we move into the item proper?
I would like it if Mr. Pinkard could just give us a couple of minutes overview in his own words.
Well, yeah, I was hoping
right.
to really focus on the representation and questions, specific questions for Mr. Pinkard. So do we have any specific questions in relation to the deputation that he's given us?
Yes, Chairman, I have one through you to Mr. Pinkard. Mr. Pinkard, so I've obviously read your concerns. What sort of comeback from what has already been said would you have in relation to this? Because obviously you don't sound like you're very happy with the council's position.
You'll need to unmute yourself if you're going to speak, Mr. Pinkard. Yeah.
I'm not happy with the response, but I understand where council is coming from. But the point we're trying to make is that the water's going into the stormwater system anyway. The question is whether it goes via through the houses and in Warona Avenue, or whether it is directed by council to one of 3 choices.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Lord Mayor.
Do you have any, Mr. Pinkard, do you have any sense that the response of Hobart is different to what is practiced elsewhere, or is it your understanding that we're doing basically what's happening everywhere else?
I understand I now understand that there's a definition of stormwater which we weren't aware of before. We could have been made aware of that at a meeting with the council officers some time ago. But yeah, but we still make the point. The stormwater, the water from Knocklofty is going to end up in the stormwater system anyway.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Mr. Pinkard, I've got a question with regard to how often has there been flooding in your properties? Was it just the May 18 event, or is it a regular occurrence with an average rainstorm?
Number 27 gets flooded quite often.
And what do you mean by quite often?
The other properties don't. May 18 was an exceptional event. We agree with that. You can say it's a 1 in 100-year event, but we don't know when the next 100-year event is going to be. Might be this year.
Yeah, but that's the same for all of Hobart, where there's a lot of upgrading that needs to be done across time, or as prioritised. And the council's working on a number of areas that they've had to upgrade stormwater and rebuild rivulet banks and all sorts of things. So they've had a heavy workload to recover from the 2018 floods as well. Are there any other questions for Mr. Pinkard? Okay, look, I think...
Sorry, Chair, I was just having difficulties with connecting with the unmute button. So just another question, just in relation, and it's a question that I asked the officers not so long ago, Mr. Pinkard, just in relation to traversing that area where there has been those landslips. What is your feeling that it's safe to pass through that area?
I personally think that the provision of a drain on top would help reduce the risk of landslips.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, Mr. Pinkard, could I ask you to go across to the YouTube channel to observe the proceedings?
Okay.
Thank you. You've got a link to it? Okay, well, I'll open the item for discussion. Does anybody have any comments? We've got an officer's recommendation that, in accordance with the Urban Drainage Act, as any overland flow arising from Knockalofty Reserve upslope from Warona, West Hobart, are not concentrated sheet flow originating the non-urban natural bush catchment. Therefore, the city is neither liable nor required to intervene with stormwater mitigation measures, as sought by the petitioners by the petition table to the council, and the petitioners be advised of that decision. Who'd like to start the discussion?
So I have a question through you to the director, if I may. So, Director, if something does go pear-shaped in this area, whose liability is it?
Chairman, through you, and I might defer to officers if this conversation starts to get too complex, but as the report indicates, Deputy, the sheet flow, which at the moment is uncontrolled, is a natural sheet flow. And whilst officers understand the potential impact that might have on the petitioners, legislatively at the moment, the council has no obligation to respond to that. Now, I guess the key issue here becomes if the council does, and it is a matter for committee and for council, if the council determines a course of action which involves the provision of infrastructure, it is no longer sheet flow. We are directing the water. The council then becomes responsible for that water flow. It becomes responsible for the maintenance of any infrastructure, and it becomes liable if that infrastructure fails. So this becomes an issue of, it's not dissimilar, I guess, to someone deciding whether or not we want to build a new road. At the moment, the infrastructure does not exist. If council chooses to install or provide that infrastructure, then we need to go in with our eyes open, understanding that with that action, becomes liability and so forth. So I'm not sure, Deputy, does that answer that question?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, it does to a certain degree, but you know, like it just seems to be falling into nobody's lap as to the responsibility. Unless we build the infrastructure, then it would be our responsibility. So it just seems to be a bit of a grey area as to who, you know, like wasn't that a Tas water easement?
The overland flow comes from the entire bank area, so it's not just down a very narrow space. And you're absolutely right. At the moment, it is no man's land, and the property owners do have no recourse because it is a natural flow from a natural area. Now, I think what the petitioners are asking is that council does agree to take responsibility for that, and that certainly is an option should council wish to go that way. But the officers, I guess, are saying to you, look, be careful, because it does bring with it cost, liability and responsibility, and it also brings a precedent where you could have a number of similar approaches made to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. We've got Alderman Barakis next with his hand up. Could you put your hands up, please? In the.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Chair, I'm happy to move this. I do have a couple of questions. I think one of which was answered, was about the liability if we did decide to do something. I suppose the other one's the cost and what you know. Because I was going through this. If we were going to do this, I imagine it'd be a reasonably expensive exercise as well.
Chairman, through you, we haven't costed it at the moment, Alderman Barakis, because we haven't prepared a design. Now, I understand the petitioners are saying it's a simple matter of a cut-off drain, and I can well understand that approach. What we would need to do, though, if council was of mind to do this, would be to do hydraulic modelling to understand the size and the dimension of that cut-off drain. We'd need to do a conceptual design, and then we need to get some cost estimates. It is reasonable to expect, I should say, that the capital cost would be considerable. I guess officers would say the longer term costs of maintenance and so forth would also be considerable. So I haven't got numbers because I don't have a design, because there is quite a body of work we would need to do to develop that design, but it would not be insignificant.
Thank you for that. Chair, like I said, I'm happy to move that. I think especially given the complexities around this from not just from the engineering point of view, but also the liability point of view, and the fact that if we were to do anything there, we might even be adding to our liabilities on here. I think this is one where I think it's appropriate to defer to what's being recommended.
All right, so we have a recommendation from Alderman Barakis. The Lord Mayor would like to speak as well. Over to you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Just a question to the Director about, how common this could be. As you say, this may be a precedent, but I guess it does raise the question about, do we actually need to have a sort of extreme rainfall event resilience building plan to kind of work out how many places are vulnerable, and whether there's anything that, to get some sense about whether this is a major risk for the city or not. I mean, would you think it's worth adding something like that to the recommendation, that we actually have a bit of a sort of eagle eye view of whether this is one of many places that is vulnerable? And I mean, maybe there's nothing we can do as a council, but maybe this is, if there's 6 or 7 sites And if one day there's sort of resilience money available for local councils from another level of government, we could take something forward.
Chairman, through you, probably a question, Lord Mayor, that I'd take on notice. What I can say to committee is that Mr. Smith and his team have recently undertaken flood modelling for 31 catchments across the city. A city that has a mountain on one side and a river on the other absolutely has a multitude of stormwater issues. And it was one of the reasons why in a recent organisational restructure, we established a dedicated stormwater team, and Mr. Smith leads that team. Now, he's done the flood modelling across 31 catchments, and there's going to be quite a deal of advice coming to committee and council over the coming months and years with regard to that work. I think, Lord Mayor...
sorry, would this area be one of those catchments or not?
Mr. Smith, can you advise if this area is captured within one of those 31 catchments that you have modelled?
Yes, this area is captured as part of the lower down the Providence Gully, which feeds into the Park Street rivulet, then the Hobart rivulet. The third of the 31 was to capture the complete drainage channels, including minor rivulets of the city. The area in question is not identified as located inside inundation risk due to the steepness of the slopes.
Perhaps, Chairman, to assist, Mr. Smith then might give the committee some advice. Leave your camera on, Aaron, for this one. Could you imagine there would be any other areas that might be subject to a similar situation as we've got at Warona Avenue that would be outside any of those 31 catchments, or is the work that you're doing going to actually identify them all, do you think?
Thank you, Glenn. The work that we're doing should identify all inundation areas. In terms of Warona being, I guess, a unique place, no. I feel that there is a large number of places in the city that have steep slope combined with an urban to bushland interface, which is what's experiencing here with the upstream is bushland. I will refer back to the petitioner's comments that the flooding outside of the May 18 flood severely affected only really one property, which he mentioned is 27 Warona Avenue. 27 Warona Avenue has identified deforestation elements on it and land subsidence. That is probably a unique factors that we have in a private landownership with that, which is not as common as, I guess, the other properties in respect, and that's reflected in, I guess, the reported flood risk on those properties.
So in a sense, that's potentially they could mitigate or reduce the risk of that, but through some actions in their own property.
Through the chair, the report, I guess, that was referred to in the petitioners, the Chroma report, was updated in 2018. The 1998 report recommended planting of their private property. The 2018 supported that again, and that is a private property matter. Council is not able to enter there. Secondly, the report did also note the fact of drainage at the top of that property, which is a crown land / vested into the owners, which has not been constructed either. So those two elements are specific to that property in the report.
Okay, so I'm just wondering whether there's is there any plan to just reinforce that message with the petitioners and the particular landowner, that message, when we reply?
Glenn, you're muted.
Take that or on board?
Chairman, when I can work the technology, look, we could add anything, Lord Mayor, that you'd like to in the recommendation in that regard. I think we need to be careful when we're providing specific advice, but as a general sort of suggested approach that might be an alternative to cut-off drains and so forth, I think it is safer for council to recommendations before we do, but certainly at officer level, we would be happy to engage further if you wanted us to.
Okay.
All right. We've heard from three. Councillor Ewan, did you have any comments?
Not really, but I just wanted to thank the staff for that report and Aaron for providing that additional information. That was really helpful. So thank you for that.
Chairman,
Sorry, yep.
Chairman, I wonder if I could just add an amendment, part 3, that the committee be updated for if there are any changes with the geology or hydrology associated with this or raised in this petition, please.
Okay, happy to accept that. But
I'm
my question to the director,
You're happy?
I'm happy, thank you.
Are you happy, Alderman Barakis?
I am happy, Deputy, yes.
Oh, sorry, you want to include that in the, okay, rather than as an amendment. So, Director, so we've got a body of work, as Mr. Smith has informed us, coming in the fullness of time. That's probably a bit of critical work that will help build resilience with regard to flooding in Hobart. And I do see that as a high priority to get that work completed and prioritise the areas from high priority through to low priority. And I assume that that body of work is ongoing and will be delivered in bite-sized chunks to us, or delivered as a complete strategy.
That Chairman is a question. I think what we'd be proposing is for a presentation or a briefing to council, to committee and any elected member that's interested, so as we can provide an overview of the situation. What we would then do is, as you say, risk assess and prioritise the work that's necessary in each of the catchments, and then progressively seek council decisions on them. Certainly, I think as the Lord Mayor alluded to, we will need to chase external funding because anything to do with hydraulics is incredibly expensive, and we need it'll be a long road for us to improve the resilience of the city based on the information that we now is now being revealed.
All right, look, thanks for that answer. If there's no further comments, could we just hear that third clause again, please, Belinda?
Chair, it's something along the lines of that the committee be updated with the hydrology and geology of the site as required.
If there are any changes, yeah.
All right, then I'm going to put the motion moved by Alderman Barakis to support the officer's recommendation plus that third clause as inserted by Deputy Lord Mayor. All those in favour? I'll just go around the alderman here. Lord Mayor, how do you vote?
In favour?
Deputy Lord Mayor?
For.
Alderman Barakis?
Oh,
Councillor Ewan?
For.
And I vote for as well. So that's unanimous. Okay, thank you.
You need to mute me, Bill. Unmute me. Unmute.
Yep. Oh. Hang on, it's going a bit wonky. Okay, so we'll move on to the next item, which is a representations report back from the Lord Mayor.
Thank you. So this is a verbal report rather than an in-depth written report. and it covers two pieces of professional development I've done in the last 6 or a bit more than 6 months, the last 10 months really. The first one I don't have any slides for. It was the International Design Conference in Hobart in November last year. The deputy also went along to it. It was a really important event for Hobart because it was an international conference. And in some ways it was a bit disappointing, the number of locals that took advantage of the conference, because there was an interesting calibre of speakers. And I guess also there was no one from from state government, which was disappointing as well, because a lot of the issues, would have been relevant to the state government too. There was quite a good attendance by City of Hobart staff. So I went to presentations including building community infrastructure, 20-minute neighbourhoods, heritage as a high-value asset, including affordable housing in urban planning and some of the tools for that. A really interesting presentation about the Canberra City inner city precinct planning. So they've got a precinct planning exercise just for the civic area of Canberra. It's quite a much larger enterprise than our particular city precinct planning. I think they said, oh, we're just a small team of 15 staff, but they seem to have some really interesting ideas and very much aiming to bring more people into civic and more people living in the city. And another one on the role of urban design panels. So that's the main things from that particular one. And now the other one that I've actually got some slides on, because it was a more recent one and had more accessible slides, and I'll just get the staff to bring up the slides for the next one. Okay, so this was called a road safety symposium. It was a one-day event in Melbourne in March, and it was organised by an organisation called the Institute for Sensible Transport. It was based at Melbourne Town Hall, and yeah, just had some interesting speakers on very much the experts in road safety. So this was a slide from John Merritt, who was a very dynamic speaker, former CEO of Vic Roads, and his comment was the cumulative fatalities of road trauma is quite devastating when you actually look at it over the long term. And his comment was, we have to own this problem. We will be judged by the result. There was, this is the figures of 191,000 people, more than 191,000 deaths on Australian roads is a pretty devastating number, but obviously that's since the early 1920s. But he also said that basically in the last 10 years there have been 12,000 deaths and 360,000 people hospitalised, and that's a cost of $300 billion to the Australian economy. So, quite devastating impact of road trauma. A really strong message from all of the presenters was that the focus on personal responsibility has led to some decrease in death, and obviously also some improvement with car safety, but they feel that this has reached its limit, and there's a big focus now on what's called safe systems, and that this problem needs to be owned by leaders, that we have a duty of care to reduce crash severity, and this idea of just saying it's all the driver's fault is not an acceptable public health response from a policy point of view. So that was John Merritt's very strong message. So I'll just go to the next slide. So I guess again this message of how do we approach road safety if we look at the look at safety culture across a whole range of other types. How would we deal with safety in a factory or safety in a whole range of other places? Do we treat road safety a bit differently? So on the left is pathological, which is sort of everyone's up to themselves and they can do the best they can. Reactive safety culture. Calculating is, I guess, where sometimes people might think we would, the debate around, for example, speed limits, it's all about balancing how much safety are we willing to offset for mobility issues, and then going right through to being proactive and having a very high safety level, a high safety culture. So I think, again, the message was there's been too much focus on being reactive with road safety. So next slide. This was just a bit of an outline of the safe system approach. This comes from this safety system approach. You hear a lot of it in road safety. It is an international concept. It's come out of the OECD and their International Transport Forum, and it's been around for quite some time. And it's basically this idea that we have a shared responsibility with actual road users. So we as road designers and traffic and transport planners have just as much responsibility, and that crashes will occur because road users are not. There's always going to be human error. So if you could just go to the next one. So again, just following on from this, there are 4 fundamental principles in the International Transport Forum. People make mistakes that lead to road crashes. The human body has a limited physical ability to tolerate a certain force over a certain speed or a certain weight of vehicle. That this is a shared responsibility amongst those who design, build, manage and use roads. It's not just the road user, and all parts of the system should be strengthened in combination. So yeah, the message again about you've got to expect and accommodate human error, but small errors, when it comes to road safety, small errors can lead to ridiculous consequences. So just sort of, a small shift of the steering wheel or a small error can actually, take your life or make you responsible for the loss of someone else's life, and that's not really an acceptable situation from the view of these road safety specialists. So moving on to the next slide. So another speaker was a chap called Jeremy Woolley, who's from the Centre for Automotive Safety Research in Adelaide. So that's been doing quite detailed road safety research since the 1960s. And this was a piece of research I thought was interesting, looking at the research on the cause of crashes. There is often a focus when you hear people talking about why have we got such, the road tolls going up in Tasmania. There's always this focus on, it's these people that are being idiots on the road, it's extreme behaviour. But they did look in quite a lot of depth at data, particularly at South Australian crashes, but it would be similar in every state around the country. And you'll see the middle table, I think, is the most interesting. So this is non-fatal metropolitan injuries. So this is injuries just in city areas. And you'll see that there's the research shows that system failure, so this is around the design of streets or the way that we've got the things like speed limits, but also the design of how things are and whether the way that we've got things set up are actually creating more dangerous circumstances, more interactions between vulnerable road users, is actually a much higher cause of the injuries than just the extreme behaviour. Whereas I think we often presume that it's just someone being an idiot, which is a much bigger factor with the fatal crashes. but less so with injuries, where it's often just a sort of, it is a system that means that if you have a small mistake, it can have a big impact in terms of injury. So I thought that was quite interesting. And then the next slide was another interesting thing I'd never really thought about, was that there's some criticism in road safety circles, and I have heard this in Tassie too, that using police reports to assess crash causation is extremely naive, biased and non-productive. That the police play an important role at the crash scene, but their job is to look at culpability, not causation. So they're looking for violations, and that is their role, but they don't have the resources, expertise, time or money to investigate crashes in depth. But that's basically, so we often don't really get a sense of the cause of crashes if we're just relying on a quick sort of assessment from the police, particularly the less serious ones in terms of injury. If it was really complicated, they'd probably send out some more specialist investigators. And the final slide was just basically this idea of a proactive safe system approach. They use this idea of the Swiss cheese model. So basically, if you've got a bad, the road design and the road rules are badly designed, and then you basically have unsafe actions on top of that, then you're more likely to get crashes. Whereas if you can basically, make your system safer, then you sort of cut down the holes that would lead to more crashes. So it was just an interesting concept that you really do have to bring the system improvements together with the road safety driver behaviour, and I think that was really the key message from the symposium, was that we as local government and policymakers and road designers have a really important role to play in road safety. Yeah, I think that's the main lessons from it. If anyone's got any questions, I can send around those full presentations if anyone's interested.
Yeah, Lord Mayor, I've got a question with regard to the causality of accidents and deaths. When a death's involved, does the coroner get involved in each death? Does the coroner have to prepare a report on every road fatality?
Yeah, I would have thought so. But again, whether they've got the sort of whether they've got all the data from the actual crash site, because often it is the police that have got to come, and so they'll be looking for a cause or a culpability, who's to blame and if there was fault and that sort of thing, but they might not necessarily be looking at the entire, they might not be road engineers or traffic engineers that can actually look at the broader picture of the system that might have made it worse. They're really looking at the, trying to work out in a fairly short amount of time to do a report, whether there was culpability. So, and I have heard the Road Safety Advisory Council agree in a sense that this is a challenge in terms of really building a strong enough picture about accidents, is the police resources and ability to do that assessment at crash sites.
Okay, any other questions for the Lord Mayor? Could you take the screen down, please, Glenn?
Yes, I have one. Thanks, Chair. Just a comment, really. I attended the Urban Design Advisory Panel session at the Urban Design Conference, and found that really interesting to see how we compare to other urban design advisory panels. And I think, Lord Mayor, you probably agree that our urban design panel structure based on Christchurch's really works very well. So, it's good to see the comparisons, but also to see how effective the advisory panel can be for helping planners and elected members make decisions.
Any further questions before we move on to the next item, or someone will need to move that we receive this report?
Happy to do that.
Thanks, Deputy. If there are no further questions, I'll put that item. Does anyone disagree that we receive this? Okay, I'll declare that carried unanimously. We'll move on to the next item. Sorry. Yeah, okay. So the next item is the committee action report status or status report. Are there any questions, and would somebody like to move it? No questions? Okay, who'd like to move that?
I'm happy to move that, Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Barakis. Looks like we've lost Councillor Ewan, and we've lost Councillor Coates is there. All right, so I've already moved the item, so you'll come into the next one, Councillor Coates. So I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Sorry. Does anybody disagree with that item? No. I'll declare that carried unanimously. And now we'll have to co-opt Councillor Coates for questions without notice. You can ask questions anyway. I don't think you need to be co-opted. There's no need there. So does anybody have a question without notice? Lord Mayor? You need to unmute, Lord Mayor.
Yeah, I've got a couple. I can send these in, but I think Belinda also is able to get them really easily now on video. So the first one is, can we ask the state government to permanently remove the need to press pedestrian light buttons in the CBD, which is currently a sort of temporary measure, I think. And also extend the area to include lights along Morrison Street and the length of Elizabeth Street, given its high pedestrian numbers.
Chair, I might be able to respond to that one. Simple answer is yes, we can.
Great, thank you. The other one is there a requirement either from ourselves or state government on large vehicles to avoid travel in urban zones during peak traffic times? And how common is this kind of traffic management tool in other states and in particular capital cities?
Through you, Chair, I'll take that one on notice.
Okay, yeah, so one final one. What is the utilisation of the city's car fleet? What would be considered as underutilisation? And is there consideration of shrinking the fleet in line with budget cuts?
Chairman, I'll take that one on notice.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from anyone else? Okay, there being none, could I have a motion to move into the close, please?
I'm happy to move that one, Chair.
Thanks, Alderman Barakis. Does anybody disagree about moving into the closed? I don't think so. So, Glenn, could you please cease the recording?